Okay, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Marcela, and I am part of the food program team at the Western Cape Economic Development Partnership, short for EDP. I'm pretty sure most of you are familiar with us, but for those of you who aren't, the EDP is a public benefit collaborative intermediary organization that supports different and diverse stakeholders, harnessing each other's energy, knowledge, and resources for collective impact. Today, I am so honored to be talking to Karen Washington. Thank you, Karen. Karen, a food justice activist and urban farmer. Karen is co-owner of Rice and Root Farm and co-founder of Black Urban Growers, short for BUGS. This is in New York City. So I read your website. You describe yourself as a farmer and advocate, working to make New York City a better place to grow and live. And now I hear you're in Georgia. I'm assuming you're doing the same thing there. And I really liked from your website that you say you, as a farmer, you feed people's body, mind, and spirit. So I think that's very appropriate for today. Just a couple of acknowledgements, and then we'll dive straight into the conversation. So I want to acknowledge that we have some people from local government here, from NGOs, from academia, and we are so glad and grateful that you've made it. I also want to thank the U.S. Embassy for making Karen's visit possible. Some of us know that Karen will be visiting some South African cities. Maybe not everybody does, but she has a full agenda. And she'll be she'll be visiting with farmers, urban gardeners, and others working to promote food security in an increasingly challenging climate. So my understanding is that your visit builds on this sort of momentum, kind of post-COVID, people wanting to look at food, like gardens, as a way of self-sustaining. And it's not coincidence that the Western Cape Food Forum started precisely for that reason. You probably heard this at the Food Forum. In 2020, the Food Forum was born as a virtual platform where people basically share ideas and information about the food crisis. But it very quickly became apparent that the focus needed to be on the food system. And so in the past, since I joined in a year and a bit, the focus has been about the broader food system. Today, we're talking about a topic that's very relevant, which is food gardens. Local government and provincial government have made food gardens part of their approach to food security. And these gardens, not unlike other parts of the world, have flourished since the pandemic. We've seen them in some of the food learning journeys that we've embarked upon, and many of you are directly involved in some of these initiatives. We have also had conversations about how food gardens are not the panacea, and that's not the only thing that's going to solve food security. So today, to reinstate the question that everybody has seen and that we've shared with you, Karen, the question is, how can urban food gardens contribute to food security in our cities? A lot of you guys joined the Food Forum, and we heard your sort of background to your work. And so I just want to start by asking you about the experience in New York City, and then we'll start kind of going into the Cape Town sort of context. So in your experience, what role do urban food gardens play in promoting food security in the New York context?
Yeah, thanks for asking that question, because I think because of COVID, it really heightened the responsibility of urban agriculture and community gardens in the city. You know, there was one point where people say, oh, you know, you have these community gardens and they're going to grow food to feed the masses. And it wasn't about that. It was about people within communities growing food that was healthy, that was culturally appropriate, and growing food in a way that was sustainable for their source of living. And so I think what the pandemic had done is really bring to the forefront how essential these community gardens are. They're not to compete against the rural farmers out there that grow in a large mass, but what it does is give people an opportunity to grow their own food. And I think that's really, really important, because I think when you are a person that have ownership of growing your own food, in a sense gives you power. You know, you understand where your food comes from. You're able to share. It's a way of culture, of tradition, of a lot of things that are happening within those small spaces that are needed. And then you don't want to see a city that is surrounded by a concrete jungle where there's no green spaces, especially where people who have to maybe walk a couple of blocks or maybe a half a mile just to get their own food. We're also in a system whereby we're told to eat healthy and to eat healthy food, but yet, believe it or not, healthy food is expensive. And so then how do we combat the fact that you want people who are in low-income neighborhoods to eat healthy, but the healthy food is so expensive? So again, having these people within their community gardens growing food that is appropriate for them is very beneficial.
And what does a successful food garden look like?
Well, a successful food garden will look like and can look like if there's a partnership between community and government. And I say that because I said in New York City and within the country, any land and any municipality has political consequences, because at one time there was a sprawl of so many vacant lots. The city didn't have any money, and so people came in and turned those empty lots into community gardens. But then as the community garden movement started to flourish, all of a sudden here comes big development coming in and saying, whoa, these communities look good. Whoa, you know, we can take these gardens and we can build housing, and whoa. And it's like, wait a second, you know, we've been here when nobody wanted to be here. We have been sustainable in terms of developing a community where we're providing not only a space to eat, but a safe haven for our elders and our children. And now you want to come and take these gardens and give it to the highest bidder. And so, like a lot of us do in terms of community organizing, we got together and we demanded change. And we demanded change because we wanted the city and government to look at us and to see how important it is to have green spaces, especially in marginalized community where there is hunger, where there is poverty, where they can't get healthy food, and try to understand that there's a need. Yes, there's a need for development, don't get me wrong, but how can you work with development, green space, and politicians and the political will to work together? And so for us, we were able to march and get the heir of that time, who was the Attorney General, Eliot Spitzer, who said that the mayor at that time who was trying to auction off those community gardens was wrong. And so that was the beginning of people understanding their civil rights, but also for government to understand what the people were trying to say. And I always tell government, you know, in communities, ask us what we want instead of what we need. Don't make the assumptions that this is what we need, where in fact, when you ask a community like us what we want, it comes from a position of power. Asking us what we need comes from a position of deficit. And so trying to have that marriage that works, where you have the community and you have the political will working together, which is really, really important. And I hope that happens, because at the end of the day, in New York, the political will of the people are for the people. The people who are in power are people who are working for us, for the community. So it's a reciprocal marriage that we need to sort of understand and to be able to grow together to make sure at the end of the day that people are fed.
So once those basics are in place, once the land, you know, is available, are there any other essential components in your experience that make a garden thrive, an urban garden?
Yes, resources. It's always good to have capital and resources. I think in the very beginning it was sort of this guerrilla gardening movement where we just went in and took on spaces and just started growing. But now we realize that, you know, we need help. You know, we need help. First of all, in New York City, they had to come up with a concept on how to protect those gardens. I couldn't say preserve, but protect those gardens. So they came up with a lease program. a lease program where you have a lease agreement to work in these spaces for 4 years. And in 4 years, you can renew the lease. You know, they just want to make sure that people are actually gardening and not just using the garden for their own purposes. But again, having be able to have those land that's secure for 4 years, and then the city now coming in with some sort of assistance. So they have a program where every year they will give out starts. They'll give out gardening starts so that people can start thinking about the types of plants that they want to grow in their garden. They'll also provide us with free composting and free water. Free water. A lot of people, believe it or not, in other places they have to pay for water. But the city allows us to use the municipal water free of charge. Again, we have fencing. It's not open space. We have fencing, but the city is able to provide us with fencing. And another thing that we don't have to pay for, we're fighting, is for insurance. I don't know how it is here, but again, you know, it's property, it's private property, and so they just want to make sure that there's no liability. But again, working with the city, saying, wait a second, we're part of the Parks Department, so if anything happens, again, the jurisdiction is within the city and not the responsibility of the people who are trying to grow food.
Mm-hmm. So often I've heard you speak about gardens as more than food.
Mm-hmm.
Can you say a little bit about how they can act as a place to build collective action?
Definitely, because even my own vision of gardening has changed. You know, in the beginning, I was focusing on just growing food. But while I was in that garden, I started to hear social issues around the environment, people having high incidence of asthma, social issues around health, people having problems with type 2 diabetes, obesity, because of the food that they were eating, economics, people having problems trying to find a job, a living wage job. And so for me, all of a sudden, I had to look at, you know, gardening differently, and that food was at the center, and it was all interconnected. And so for me, you know, people will ask time and time again, is the food system broken and needs to be fixed? Folks, is the food system broken and needs to be fixed? And people will raise their hand and say, yes, it does, yes, it does. And then I realized, wait a second, it's doing exactly what it's supposed to be doing. It's a care system. So the food system doesn't need to be fixed. It needs to change. And that change comes with community power. Putting the power back into the hands of the community to make decisions. They live there. They know how their community works. They know their wants. And so then how do you now all of a sudden change the dynamics of people who for so long have been called marginalized, poor, deficits, problems, into changing the mindset of people who had at one time no power whatsoever, no resources whatsoever, now changing that mindset. Wait a second, these people who are strong and resilient and brave, and putting that power back into their own hands to think about them being self-sufficient and self-reliant. What is so scary about that? What is so scary about people trying to feed their own families, using community gardens as an access for food, but also as a consciousness of civil engagement? You know, it's about the politics of food, of course, but also it's about getting people to understand that when you have people who are hungry and you have pieces of land where they can grow their own food, that's powerful. And that people that you once deemed powerless all of a sudden becomes powerful. Not only do you as a community benefit, but the government itself benefits, because the government doesn't want to see people who are poor and impoverished, because that puts a lot of burden on the capitalistic problems, you know, of economics. You want to see people who are contributing to the whole economic food system in a way that they can be self-sufficient and self-reliant and feed their families and have a job where they can work and be part of the economy. It's so simple. What is it? What is it at a government level that don't want to see people stand on their own feet? What is the fear? And that's what I don't understand. What is the fear when the government are for the people, by the people? The government, you are the people. So what is it? What is the fear of people trying to feed themselves when you talk about hunger and poverty and trying to get out of hunger and poverty, and people are trying to grow food to get out of hunger and poverty? What is it? So what can government do to support that idea? Yes, you're going to get outside people, especially people in power and big rural farmers that are saying you can't do that because if you get these people the agency and power to grow their own food, how am I going to survive? Well, if you give people the agency and power to grow their own food, you are going to get better because they'll be able to buy from you too. Hello? Makes sense. Doesn't that make sense?
Yeah. You mentioned government and that we were talking about this earlier. I mean, can you give us some examples of how maybe at the local level government has supported food gardens?
Yes, so definitely, really in essence to help, first of all, in New York City for the first time, after years, I got gray hair, after years of letting the city understand the importance of community gardens, there's now an office of urban agriculture happening for the first time. And so when we talk about urban agriculture, because this is happening around the country, we're not only talking about community gardens, but we're talking about all phases of growing food, rooftops, greenhouses, aquaponics, hydroponics, community gardens. And for the first time that's being changed. And for the first time at the city level, there are going to be policies in place on how to regulate food production. How to regulate food production in such a way that gives everybody a chance to grow their own food without political consequences. What that's going to look in terms of the economic side, I'm just wondering what that is going to look like because in essence, it's an indicator for job creation. And I want government to think outside the raised beds on what that economic engine could look like and how we can make sure that those who have been growing food for so long in community gardens can also compete with those with power and privilege that can grow on rooftops and have these huge greenhouses of aquaponics and hydroponics so that there is this sort of equity so that everybody benefits. And that one group with power and privilege, because they have use of technology, is better off. So that's what's changing. What's also changing is the fact that, again, I think for the first time, again with COVID, they really have taken community gardens seriously. And I say that because when the epidemic happened, the first thing the city said was, we have to shut down the community gardens. We have to close the gates. You can't be allowed to go in unless you want to water the plants and feed the chickens. And it's like, wait a second, we're at a crisis here. We're at a crisis here where our people, black and brown people in low-income neighborhoods are dying from COVID. We didn't have any vaccination at that time, no vaccines. So the only way people understood how to fight this virus was by eating healthy and being healthy. And so again, sorry politicians, get out of the way. And we demanded, we opened those community gardens and we started growing food and we started networking with local food pantries and soup kitchens. How can we collectively grow food and make sure that our people are being fed? That's what we did. And of course we were hailed by the politicians. Job well done, well done. But the first thing was, they should have listened to the voices of the community, that the intention was not to commandeer and do what we want to do. We did do guidelines. We, as a matter of fact, we met with the health department to make sure how can we open these gardens in a safe way, to practice protocol, 6 feet, wear a mask, wear gloves, and do it the correct way. And we did it. And so we were hailed for it. We were hailed for it. And so all of a sudden the city started saying we were the essential workers and realizing what we were trying to do was to feed people. And so now, as we've gone past this epidemic, which, we're very, very careful because there may be more to come, but how all of a sudden we understand, first of all, who the essential workers are, gardeners and farmers and restaurant workers, right? All those people who maintain the stability of our livelihood. But then also now, how do we make sure that for once and for all, we maintain these spaces? And how do we now think about giving them support, giving them resources? And those resources are
And so government obviously is essential, but did the private sector play a role? Do they play a role? How do they contribute?
Yes. So in the community garden world, there is government-owned gardens, and there's nonprofit-owned gardens, and there are private sectors that own gardens, and there are even companies like Target that help support gardens. And so what people are also looking for, again, thinking outside the raised bed, not only government, what other private businesses will be able to support community gardens. And you have some private entities. So they have this woman named Bette Midler, I never heard of her. So she has this whole garden group that she helps run. And so, again, it's a partnership between government, non-government agencies, and the private sector, all coming together to help with resources for these community gardens and urban farms in New York City. And you'd be surprised, even individual people with power and privilege would write a check or would take on a community garden to support them. A lot of some of the rap stars that came out of Brooklyn and Queens have taken on to support some of the community gardens in New York City. So again, it's not just the government, but it's the private sector as well as really involved in maintaining those community gardens.
I have one final question before we, yeah, go ahead.
Final question? Okay.
No,
yeah.
no. There are many more questions coming from the audience. But I want to start turning to Cape Town.
Yes.
But so this is maybe a segue into that conversation. Okay. So the question is, how can, in your view, how can those relationships that you've kind of outlined for us, government, private sector, not-for-profit sector, be strengthened to support food security?
Yeah, first of all, understand what people are trying to do. They're just trying to feed their family. Understand that. And not be afraid to give people pockets of land, especially those that are in impoverished area. You know, Amy took me around to see some places of what poverty looks like. And the need to speak to some of the farmers today of just having a piece of land that they can grow food on, that they can call their own, but there are obstacles in place that prevent people from owning land. And I say that because, let's face it, folks, I'm 68 years of age. I'm not owning nothing because I don't live long enough to own. We don't live long enough to own anything. So why do we always think about owning something that we don't live long enough to own? So I had to change my concept about land ownership. I'm a steward of the land. I'm a caretaker of the land, because being a steward or a caretaker of the land, I know that land will go on from generations to generations, and not about owning something that I know I'm not going to live long enough to even possess. And so getting people with the mindset on how do we provide spaces for people to grow their own food, to feed their own family when there is hunger and poverty. It doesn't make sense. What is just tell me, what is the fear? Well, you know what? You know what the fear is. Because when you help people at the lowest rung, there is this mindset that by helping poor people, you're taking something away from people who are wealthy. No. You help poor people to move up, the wealthy people become more wealthier. It makes sense. And so helping poor people grow their own food will impact their need to not be sick, to be able to eat food that's culturally appropriate, not to rely on healthy organic food that they cannot afford, because organic food all of a sudden that's supposed to be healthy is expensive. What? So getting people the urgency to grow their own food. And let me tell you about growing your own food. There is a story behind that. There's a story behind sitting down, growing your own food within the community, and having grandma and grandpa talk about You know, that's how we used to grow our own food. We didn't get medicine because we grew this plant here, this medicinal plant here, and this would help us. Or we had this sort of food that's part of our culture. And so this is how we grew the food, and this is how we cook the food. And start having those conversations. And so what is it about people having small plots of land to grow food that is culturally appropriate, to grow food that's traditional, to have that conversation of intergenerational conversation of elders and youth coming together, understanding how that food is there and is part of their whole culture and their tradition. What is it that's preventing society for people to grow their own food in small spots? It's a win-win for everybody. It's a win-win, especially globally. We're trying to fight hunger and poverty, and I hear from the lips of so many people is that we want people to eat healthy food. Well, if you give them the ability to grow their own food, that's a step in the right direction. But again, it's this mindset of ownership. Who owns the land? How can we control the land? You know, it's not their land. It's no, you know. And in essence, people are not worried about who owns the land. They're just worried about, can they have a land to grow their own food?
You know, you speak about New York City. You've described New York City, and that feels very far and yet so near. The stories that you've shared with us today, and I want to open it up to our neighbors here. If you have any questions or any reflections on things that may have stricken a chord from what you've heard, let's open it up. Would anybody want to get us started?
Yeah, and don't be afraid, because I don't bite. I have teeth, but I don't. And I'm here to learn.
Yeah, Shanaz.
Thanks for thinking of our community, coming all the way and coming to share about New York with us, Ms. Karen Washington. Thank you very much. Okay, I would like to be very short. I wrote it down. Today it's about food gardens, right, that we are here for. I would like to share, yes, the government, our local government, to encourage that we have food gardens. So much so that they invite us to meetings and they encourage us, go out and earmark a space. And when you do what they are saying, when they invited you, you speak to this one, you start at sub-council, then you start to the councillors, and you talk and you write emails, only to find that, after spoken to everyone, that the parks and fathers say, no, you can't have it. And that is so, it's a mindset. Who does this belong to? So you speak to the one, you send an email, and the one say, if that department say yes, they can have it. And if that department say yes, we will then help. Then it goes to the line, and at the end, when parks and fathers say, but you can't have it, that is our school program. Nobody's playing there during school program. I've been there for 12 years, right? So, and now they're totally quiet. After all, now the mayor and everyone is inviting you to a summit, and you go, and again you go back and you go do that, and you pay for the summit. You pay the ticket, you didn't go in for free, and I sit there and I think, again you are inviting me, I paid for it, and again you say go back, but you are not saying, how far did you get before that? You are not inviting me in my community to say, come back. We said you must do this. Have you done it? And who is keeping the door closed? Right? You're just saying go back again. So in other words, right. So I'm not asking for this piece for me. There's a piece next to the civic. It is fenced because that is what we are encouraged to go find a space on a civic, on a clinic, at the police station, at the school, anywhere where it's fenced already. Because nobody's going to give you any support when it's open. Because it's going to be walked away when it's open, right? So, now you have found the space. It's on the civic, which is these things. It is fenced, it's half 3/4 fence. Now you ask. And park and fathers say you can't have it, right? So, but I'm going to go back. I'm going back, and I'm not going alone. I have asked alone, but now I see I've got others who has got the same need. They also want. So let's all club together and start by asking one piece. If we got this piece, we're going to go back and we start others, right? But this is not for me. Like you are saying, what is our age? I'm 61. I am just as grey as you are. Right? But I'm here today because I come from a culture and organization where they're teaching our youth to be permaculturists. They want to make a difference. They do it further than what I do. But when they are done, where are they going in my community? So I'm saying, even if there is one space, I've already earmarked, but I've also earmarked the person and the couple I want to bring in, because it's not for me. It's not our land. We are only custodians. I want to see this young couple who came to learn to permaculture, got to know one another, got married there, and now they are on a big farm where they're learning more, but they have to come home. What are they coming home to? So I told my councillor, are you aware, in your ward, you have so many of permaculturist groups and young ones. So we are asking, how do we make this an economical thing? They've been taught how to grow it, how to sell it. So we have to make a start for them. So for that reason, when I was invited, for that, I wanted to come tell you. Because it's not for me, it's not ours. We're only the custodians, we're passing through, but we have to leave it for our family.
Can I just say one thing about, because what you're saying, so how we had to remedy that dilemma that you're talking about. And so the New York City now has a parks department. At one time, the community gardens stood alone. While we were fighting for preservation, a little birdie in our ear say, get these gardens under the parks department. And so a lot of us went into the parks department, and powers that be saw that happening, wanted to shut it down. But we fought for that. And so now all the community gardens are under the New York City Parks Department, which means that under that jurisdiction, they can get land as long as there is land available and is not ready for development. They can get land. You have to have 10 people that are interested in gardening. 10 people interested in gardening. The land is not for sale or for development. And you sign a lease agreement, a 4-year lease agreement. You're given the space. They will give you fencing. They will give you lumber. They will give you soil, and they will give you compost and seedlings to start. We had to fight for that. But that's what you have to fight for. In the beginning, like you have those spaces, we would take over those spaces. We would take over those spaces to get media attention, because you can't have a government that says that people need to eat healthy, and yet you're denying people to go into gardens to feed people, to go into gardens to grow food. And so I don't know how it is here, but we had groups of people going into spaces, they call us guerrilla gardeners, to go into spaces to draw the attention. The media attention is like, the government is preventing us from being in spaces, and yet they want us to eat healthy. And again, sometimes, you have to bring it to attention to prove your point. And so I hope that, the people in here that are listening to what you're saying can sort of talk to the powers that be to make sure that the spaces are available for people who want to grow food. And again, what is the objection for people to want to grow? What is it? That's number one. You have to answer that yourselves. And number two, who is it? Like, where in your system is there a group that is designated especially for open space and community gardens? And if that doesn't exist, it needs to exist. Because COVID has taught us that people want to grow food. They want to be hungry. And so if that's the case, and you have a huge population of people who are unemployed and who are hungry, and they want to grow their own food because organic food is so expensive, then it's upon yourself as people to form an organization specifically to help people who want to grow on lots legally, quote unquote, but also want to grow on food to feed their families. And it has to be some sort of organization, because you don't want it to be disorganized. You want it to be organized, but yet demonstrate a group or agency that's going to deal. Is it Parks Department? I don't know. Is there another agency that's going to deal specifically for people who want to grow food in Cape Town? What is it going to take? Where is the support going to be? Is it going to be money set aside, or support, or connection with nonprofits or private sector, whatever? But you have to have some sort of strategy and something in place, so people like this person that wants to grow food, who are they going to go to? And then who has the power? Not the middleman, not the person in the neighborhood and say, you can't grow that food because it's not your ownership. But then they can say, I've got a license or an agreement from a city agency that says I have a right to be here. That's powerful. That's powerful. So if you don't have that here, I would suggest that you at least have some sort of organization or agency in place so that people can at least go to and say, I want to grow food here, and have the support of the government.
Thank you, Karen. I'm going to ask...
I forgot to say I am from an organization called Food Agency Cape Town, and I have
That's their mission. Yeah.
Okay.
And I know there's a process. I just wanted to. I know we will have a government in the meeting. So
Okay.
I just wanted them to know there is a struggle, but we can.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Rashida. Shanaz, would you like to go next? I think you'll be meeting some of them tomorrow as well, in fact. Yeah.
Okay, no problem. And folks, what's said here stays here. You know, just let's be respectful. Oh, well, you know, just be mindful, because I don't want any repercussions of people say things that, you know, may be disturbing or whatever.
Thank you.
Just be cognizant of that.
Point taken, yes.
Hi, thank you very much for a wonderful presentation. I was just interested in your experience. Is there a gendered nature to what you're doing at all? Is there a different experience for men and women in terms of thinking about food security or thinking about food gardens? And without kind of coming to a conclusion or putting words in your mouth, is this any way some kind of step towards helping women with empowerment or women's autonomy?
Yeah, that's a hard question to say. First of all, most of the community gardens are women run. This is what we do. You know what I'm saying? This is what we do. That, you know, each community garden is their own entity. So it's not, you know, it's not like one size fits all. Every community garden has their own rules and regulations on what they want to do with their community garden. Some community gardens grow food to feed the community. Some community gardens grow food just to feed their members. Some community gardens have an educational component where they teach children. Some community gardens are just quiet places for nature habitat. Every community garden has their own spiel on what they want to do. My instance, my community garden decided that, you know, we needed to grow food, but we also needed to provide food as an economic engine. And so we decided that in 2004, when we looked at the whole landscape of food in our community in the Bronx, we had no farmers markets. We had nothing. Nobody wants to come into poor neighborhoods because the mindset is that poor people can't afford to buy food, which is nonsense. Poor people want to buy food because they want to feed their family. So again, I was told when we were going to start a farmers market of 5 community gardens and 4 rural farmers who are going to help us form this market, it'll never happen because Upstate farmers don't want to come to the Bronx because the Bronx is too far. Upstate farmers don't want to come to the Bronx because the Bronx is dangerous. Upstate farmers don't want to come to the Bronx because the Bronx is scary. Okay, so let's see. The upstate farmers don't want to come to the Bronx because the Bronx is dangerous. Well, like any other neighborhood is being gentrified. Upstate farmers don't want to come to the Bronx because it's too far. But in order for you to go to the 14th Street market in Manhattan, you got to go to the Bronx. And then farmers markets not going to work. Farmers don't want to come to the Bronx because, you know, poor people can't spend money. Per capita, poor people spend a lot of money. And so just sort of forget about that and form this community-based farmers market. Now, for community gardens trying to control this, right? The city steps in. You can't have this unless you pay. Pay what? Pay revenue. And I'm saying, wait a second. We're in a poor neighborhood where there's hunger and poverty and people are trying to be self-sufficient and you're asking us to pay? We're not paying. We're not paying. So we start this community-based farmers market whereby, again, thinking about the economics, hiring people in the community to run the market, job creation, but the whole essence is having the revenue from the people of the community go within that farmers market, the money stays in the community and provides jobs. What? Trying to get people to understand how it works when you help community to be self-sufficient and self-reliant economically. Because even today, a lot of farmers come into communities that they don't live in, and where does that money go? It doesn't stay in the community. Those dollars stay out. They go, the farmers come in, get their money, and go out. Whereas if you have community-based farmers markets where the food is grown in the community and you're providing jobs for people to grow food, to man the community gardens, to be a driver, to someone to count the money, all that money that you then get goes back into the community gardens and the community. Hello? Hello? And so when we talk about being self-sufficient and self-reliant, that's what people want to do. It's an economic engine for job creation. And then what's so good about it, then you have people who say, wait a second, guess what I can do with that food? I can do value-added products. I can take a tomato and I can make tomato sauce. I can take peppers and make hot sauce. Economic engine. I can do composting and take that compost and sell it. I can do a lot of things within the community to be self-sufficient and self-reliant. But again, let's think about power and privilege. And there's a lot of people with power and privilege that don't want to see people who are poor or sick move up the ladder.
But I think you're going to see a lot of those initiatives here.
Oh, I can't wait.
Yeah, maybe small scale, but I think you'll be pleasantly surprised to see how some groups really are getting there, you know, on value add products and things like that. But let me turn it back to you guys. Yeah, Louis, if you don't mind getting close to the mic, and then you, sir.
So the question that I have for you is whether you can explain historically in this country, things have become very siloed and very deeply affected by apartheid. So for people to, the default for so long was for people to be doing their own thing in quite a protected way in their own corners. Mm-hmm. We did see a lot of that change during COVID. Mm-hmm. I want to know how you mobilized. So you spoke about there being lots of different individual gardens and some of them in partnerships. Mm-hmm. Did you ever come together to negotiate this form of making leases mm-hmm. with local government? did you actually have platforms for mobilizing together?
Mm-hmm.
And were they only community gardens that were mobilizing, or were you getting partners from elsewhere so that you had voices with more clout working with you? Just some examples of how you actually made that change happen, because it's difficult for us here. I mean, Rashida was describing some of the kind of the fact that the left hand doesn't always know what the right hand is doing in government and doesn't have the political will. How did you push against those sorts of things? Can you give us some examples?
Excellent. So in 1998, the mayor, your favorite mayor, Giuliani, tried to auction off 100 community gardens. And at that time, community gardens were not organized. Everybody was working their own silos, because we never thought that the city would try to take away. Why would the city try to take away gardens when gardens were helping to feed communities, decrease crime, providing a safety net for seniors and children, and we were just trying to grow food to feed our families? So why would you even think that the city wanted to take those gardens away? But they did, to sell to the highest bidder. And so gardens who were once disorganized, we became organized, and we started to learn about civil engagement. Who locally has the power? Who can we demonstrate to get the ear of somebody to hear what was happening? How can we then also align ourselves with people in businesses and in housing that were having the same sort of problem? And so what we did, and I have pictures of it, we marched in City Hall. You couldn't march in City Hall. We rallied from all 5 boroughs, came together and started marching on City Hall and saying, you know, we want to save our gardens. We want to save our gardens, and continue to march, and then getting faith-based organizations, housing organizations to hear us or what we were trying to do. And at that time, the Attorney General, who was Eliot Spitzer, heard us and said what the mayor did was wrong. And we were able to save those 100 community gardens. And as a result, we formed what was now called the New York City Community Garden Coalition, of 400 community gardens coming together, being the voice. And every year that there is an election of candidates that want to run for mayor, the community garden has a forum to say to that candidate, what are you going to do to make sure community gardens are preserved? And it has to happen continuously, because whenever you have any new administration that's coming in, they have to know the history of how we fought to preserve these community gardens. Even new people that are coming in have to understand the history on how we fought these community gardens to maintain those community gardens, to negotiate with the city to have leases, to negotiate with the city that we don't have to pay for water, to negotiate with the city that we don't have to pay for insurance, to negotiate. And this takes effort and this takes time. And one thing that you have to learn when you're dealing with people who for so long have been in silos, you have to develop relationships. And with the relationship comes trust. And it doesn't happen overnight. So you have to organize in such a way that you get people to believe in you, that they are able to trust you, and that you'll be able to build relationships over a prolonged period of time, so that they believe in the cause, and they believe in what you're doing, and they believe that together you can make change. And so that's how it happened in New York City, forming a coalition in 1998 of 100 community gardens at that time. Now there are over 400 community gardens as part of the New York City Community Garden Coalition, which is an advocacy group to help to maintain and protect community gardens in New York City. I got gray hair to prove it. And another thing, on the local level, as I said, this is my personal way of doing things. So in New York City, we have different agencies. So we have a council person that works on a local level. We have an assembly person that works on the state level. We have state senators and Congress that work on a federal level. I got a chance to meet everybody. You know why? Because as a voting person, I feel I have a right to talk to the people that I put in power. So what I would do is get up, pick up the phone, and says, my name is Karen Washington. Can I meet with the council person? You coming with a group of people? No, I want to meet with the council person that I voted for because I want to find out what they are doing, he or she doing for my community. I want to invite my elected official, my senator, and my assembly person, come to our party, our garden party, so that you can talk to the community and hear what they want. In America, as a voter, I feel that it's my obligation as a registered voter to make sure the person that I vote for is accountable. I don't know how it is here. I don't know how it is here. But in the United States, you use that, exercise the power of vote to vote a person in office. The person in office is supposed to be accountable for what you put them in office. And so if that is the truth, then why not? Why can't I pick up the phone and say I want to come to the office? People think I'm crazy, but I met everybody. I know everybody because I figured that I can do that. I can invite them. The local politicians, people control, invite them into my community and see what's happening. Look what we're doing. Fight for us. We need money. We need support. This is what we're doing to grow food for our family. Support us. And a lot of people in communities, they're silent and complacent. They will yak, yak, yak about the problem. I got this problem. I got that problem. But they're not organized to use their power and their voice to make change.
I suspect that they wouldn't turn down a garden party anywhere. I mean, not even in Cape Town. But please, sir, if you'd like to go next.
I learned when I came to, I was actually from Athlone. And I was in the Defense Force. It's a long story. But I'm not going to go into that long story. And what I did, I said to myself when I retired from all the work I done, I said, no man, let I try what my grandfather taught me like a boy. But now I see in Crawford, there's no land, there's nothing here. Right? So I said, okay, let I try something. I went one day to Khayelitsha. I came in Khayelitsha, I met a gentleman, Ayanda Ubosi, from the Department of Agriculture. And the two of us sit and talk and talk. He said to me, no man, I have a garden where you can practice and go on. So he took me to this garden. And he said, no, you can work here. I said, is that all? That is not how your culture works. You have to introduce me to these people and to this elderly people. Okay, he said, oh, okay, you know that. I said, yes. We went, it was a community garden. We went, I sat with him. We build a relationship. From there they say, you can farm with us. I farm with him actually for a year. And I said, yeah, I must spread my wings. I met a gentleman called Ben Mansfield. He's from Switzerland and Zurich. And by that time, I went to Inhlanganiso School. And I have the lease, I gave it to Ayanda. That is the procedure of the Department of Agriculture. So I gave him the lease, 5-year lease, they require. We fill it in. And then I start a little bit to clear out everything. You know, in the school garden, there's a lot of windows broken. So all that broken windows fall onto that piece of land. You can ask Ruby's and also story or something. So what I did, I cleaned. I took community people. I said, let's dig in and sort this out. We sorted it out nicely. And I met a guy, Ben Mansfield. He said to me, hey, you want to start a garden? I said, yes. Let I try with the knowledge I gained from the elders, from this place. And we both of us starting this garden. We're putting some money in, he put some money in to buy seedlings and all these things. And from there we build. And it was said, that is the beautifulest garden, inside sea and in Khayelitsha. Today it stands there with a hydroponic system, with an aquaponic system. And the garden is beautiful still. But now, let me look at this. Why I say Lukani Urban Farming is now a PTY Limited. I didn't stop there. I went further. I approached the Department of Education. We talked. They said to me, okay, let's try you out. They gave me 9 gardens, 4 in Mamasbury, 5 in Atlantis. So they say, what you gonna do with this school land here? We organize with the school land. I said, I want to build tunnels as well. Okay, they give me a budget, everything. Today I built 9 tunnels. I designed it inside myself. So that's why I say you can expand if the willing power is there. You must have power. It's hard work to turn sandy soil into real soil, compost soil, that things can grow. I can show you some photos, what I'm busy with in Mama's Buddhist.
Jeremy, maybe you can save the photos for the networking so we can give others a chance to ask. But I mean, it's a great example of partnering, right? I mean, I think that Lucaño Hub has a really good, has showcased, you know, how to work with government and the private sector. I don't know if you want to comment on that or if we invite somebody else.
I think that's absolutely excellent. And I think also what we need to do is really capture the knowledge of our elders. You know, I go around the country and I tell young people if they have family that was into farming or gardening, take out those Samsung Galaxies and iPhones and capture those stories. Because that's tradition and that's culture that goes from generation to generation. And a community garden is a great place for storytelling. It's a great place to see youth sit around and hear from their elders how it is to grow food, how it is to take care of food. And that knowledge is passed down to younger people. And we need to make sure that that is happening, that there's this intergenerational partnership of elders speaking to young kids about their history, their tradition, and their culture is greatly needed. And community gardens do that.
Anybody else? Anna?
I think one of the things that I'm just curious about what your thoughts are on, but also I think this will kind of be a theme that you might pick up in your time here, is more, and you mentioned this a little bit earlier, around access to land and the tensions around access to land. I think for me, within the Cape Town context and in the South African context, this is something that's so loaded, because land has so many overlapping needs or interests on it. And in particular, the one that I have experience of is the need for housing. And I'm sure this is something that you've already kind of picked up in your very short time here so far, but I'm sure it will continue to be part of the conversation. So I think for me, one of the questions is, and I'm really glad you raised the idea of this like short-term lease, the 3 to 4 year lease, as a potential way of kind of dealing with some of the overlapping needs. Ultimately, we have portions of state-owned land in the city, for example, that have been set aside for social housing that wait for many years while that process is kind of undergone.
Right.
So I think one of the potential interesting ways that we could be looking at this is how do we look at urban gardening as an interim use as well, or at least as a starting point. Because ultimately you do end up with these fenced off pieces of land that can't be occupied, that are in the process of planning processes waiting for approval. So maybe one question is, I mean, have you had any instances like that where the gardening part has been the first step in a longer process? And then also with that, I'm quite curious about how the urban gardens can fit into a more integrated human settlements plan. So if you do, for example, build social housing, how does that garden, which is on a piece of land, become part of a larger process?
You said it. You just said it. You speak. First of all, which you're absolutely right, because there have been some instances whereby development happens. So there's a 4-year lease, for instance, and all of a sudden the city decides, well, they need that garden for development. So in the bylaws, it said that if the city takes that garden, the city then has to offer another space within that radius so that the gardeners can still garden. And so that's the trade-off. That's a trade-off. So, for instance, there always, even in New York City, there's always the need for development because everyone has a homeless population. And so there's always a need for development. When I speak to urban planners, I say, think about incorporating open space and gardening into your development. So even if the city, say for instance, that you're giving people short-term leases and the city decides, well, you know, we're going to need this space for housing, then how can the city incorporate housing in those developments? So it's a win-win situation. So because you don't want to see yourself surrounded, like in New York City, a concrete jungle, where there's no open spaces, no green spaces. So it's like people like you and others that think about the landscape of the need for housing and development, pairing off, again, vacant land that the city has, you know, come up with a plan that people can use these spaces for 4 or 5 year renewable lease if the city doesn't have any plans. But if in the event the city does have plans for it, that, well, you know, we're going to take the gardens, but we're going to make sure that the development that we put here has green space as well. So it's a win-win situation. And that's what we're doing in New York City, trying to still have that mindset of being of developers putting in green space. And sometimes they're doing green space on rooftops. So they're doing rooftops or in a cul-de-sac. But again, trying to, especially with climate change, everyone's talking about climate change. Yeah, but so developers have to also think about what does green space look like in the development if they're doing housing. So that's a great question, and hopefully that, you know, what you're saying is true. These state land that's out there, that's nothing happening, to think about, again, giving leases, and then also think about the private sector, because even, it's not only about city-owned land, but churches and synagogue and libraries, they got land. How they're elderly couples that, you know, have space, people who have backyards, they have land. So look at the whole agricultural system. Who got land beside the city? Are there religious groups here that got land? Are there private people that got land? Or even are there nice people with power and privilege? They got land too to lease? You know, you're not going to know unless you ask. You know, you're not going to know. But then you, again, you have people to sort of manage, but you need a department to manage that. You know, and who is that department in Cape Town to do that? But great idea.
I would just add to your list parking lots. Let's take some of those parking lots. But that's a different conversation. And I know we're reaching the end of our time. Andrew, I want to call on you. Busunzi. Yeah? Couple of minutes, you, and then over to Andrew. Yeah, go for it.
I've noticed a few commonalities and similarities with us. One that was very interesting to me is that water that the city is giving for free, just an interest. It was from us. We are encouraging the gardeners not to use the municipal water because it comes very expensive with huge bills. It's interesting how the city is doing there. Maybe they are putting it as a rebate. I don't know. It's quite interesting, maybe, just to elaborate on that one. In terms of the 4-year lease agreements, do they sort of, at the end of the period that the council consider, I don't know, maybe call them council there, the municipality, renewing those? Are they paying for rent for that? There's no pay. And then, in terms of sustainability, if you were to look at the success of the garden, would you say, percentage-wise, after we have started them on the first year, when the lease started, at the end of that term, 50%, 60%, they're still there?
Are you kidding? Yes.
Yes.
100% they're still there.
Yes, but then coming to the last point that my sister mentioned here, about integration between human settlement, we've got a different concept, but it's not really about community, but an individual household doing a garden at home, where we've got a very high successful drive, one home, one garden.
Excellent.
Maybe with the challenges of land access as a group, maybe considering where you've got a plot to stay as a residential area, that could be a drive to consider.
Right.
But we are learning from what you are sharing with us as well.
All have 5 homes and they share a space. They have in the United States they're being called agro hoods, whereby the developers are building homes that are surrounded by a couple of acres of land, and each homeowner has to be responsible collectively on working on that land. They call them agro hoods that is starting to happen. As far as the water, so the water comes from the city, and so in New York City, we garden from May until maybe October, November, and that's it. And then it shuts down. And then there's a special valve that has to be used so that you're not getting the full force of water. You're getting pressurized water so that it's conserved. And then you are allowed to water certain times of the day. And that leaves it up to the discretion of the gardens. And people understand how water is precious, and so they water when needed. And so, yeah, and we don't pay it's not how we pay rent. No, we're not paying rent. Because just think about what the gardens do. They decrease crime. You know what I'm saying? You pay more for crime than you do having gardens that invite people in the community. Gardens are also, deal with stress, mental health, a lot of, and again, for the city to sort of think about these gardens as keeping people out of mental institutions, keeping people out of crime, providing a safe haven, you have to think about the price you pay when you don't have a garden versus the community that has a garden, and how it helps the community as a whole to decrease the stress level, less crime, because the community garden brings in the element of community working together.
And those are the kind of calculations that are difficult to put on paper, but
Right.
that are very real, right? I am afraid we have run out of time, but I want Andrew to bring us to a close with some of the highlights. Sorry, Nazir. We're going to have time now to network, so we'll have a chance to interact. You're staying around for a little bit, right, Karen?
Yeah. Sure.
Cool. So, Andrew, over to you for some closing thoughts.
On behalf of everyone here, thank you really for being here.
Thank you for having
and
me.
thank your colleagues for making it possible for us to be part of this partnership for your journey here in a knowledge exchange in our country. But I guess Marcella, the one thing that really stood out to me is that food gardens are not just about food. Okay, and if one reduces them to food, you have limited lobbying power. Of course, they're about more affordable, healthy food. And we have a massive food crisis in our country. So, of course, they're about that. But what I heard you say and other colleagues here say is that there's multiple benefits. And I just want to go through them because it's part of building up the case for a more consistent, expanded program at our provincial government level, at our city government level, in other municipalities, and even at our federal or national government level. Firstly, helping people understand where food comes from, because many urban dwellers have lost contact with the land and what even baby carrots look like, if they're not in a packet. Secondly, the educational role of food, particularly for children. Thirdly, the importance of green spaces in an urban area, and particularly quiet spaces, and your point about dealing with stress and mental health is absolutely critical. And also as part of safety and violence prevention programs that would definitely be incorporated into that. The importance of culture and tradition and the link to food and heritage and identity at a community level. You mentioned medicinal plants. And certainly when we were doing our food learning journey in Langa, there was a wonderful garden there that wasn't just about what you ate, but also the community would pop in and say, "Ooh, I need something for my tummy," and the gardener there gives them something for their tummy. I like your point about intergenerational conversations and what do we learn from foremothers and forefathers, and then ultimately how organizing a community garden or a school garden or an early childhood development center garden, because these are some of the collective gardens that we've got here, it builds community organization and resilience. So even if the garden is no longer there, you are leaving behind relationships at a community level and relationships with your local authority and the department that you've been working with, and that builds society. That's part of good governance. So, colleagues, that's the motivation for why we need more support for food gardens as a movement, as an organization, in government as well. So, I hope that does justice to what you
Sure did.
said here. Jill, if I remember correctly, you have a present.
I do. Marcella has.
Okay. Marcella, please.
It was hiding behind you all along.
Oh, wow. Thank you so much. Do I open it now?
Karen. You can.
I'm like a little kid. It's like Christmas. Oh, wow. This is lovely.
For Kate.
There we go.
Thank you so much. Oh my goodness.
Cooking time.
I would definitely.
Sorry it weighs so much to go back. You might not be able to send it.
No,
Diplomatic pouch.
no, are you kidding? You're putting your hands on this. It's going right in the suitcase. Oh no, I will find. I check my luggage. But thank you. Well, thank you so much. This has been great. This is my first day, with more days to come. And if the first day is what's going to be the next 2 weeks, then I am truly impressed. And only thing I just want to, first of all, I've been very emotional being a black person on the continent of Africa. So that has really inspired me. But then so far to listen to, you have such great people, that I met that want to grow food, that want to be self-sufficient, that want to just be human, just to be held as human beings that just want to have a decent way of living, and I think that's what we all want to do. And hopefully, there are people within this room, but are people around the world that can find in their heart to go beyond the color of one's skin, beyond where one lives, beyond how much money they have. But at the end of the day, we have one planet here. And how do we make it equitable, not equal, but equitable for all people to have 3 things: healthy food, clean water, and a place to live. So thank you so much for having me.